The mail-order bride stepped off the stagecoach in Beaver, Utah Territory, with her eyes fixed on the dusty ground, her shoulders hunched forward as though the weight of the world pressed down upon her slender frame. It was September 1876, and the afternoon sun beat mercilessly on the small frontier settlement nestled in the shadow of the Tushar Mountains. Clara Zimmerman had traveled from Missouri with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a letter of arrangement to marry a shopkeeper she had never met, a man who had promised her security and respectability in his carefully penned correspondence. She was 20 years old, though she looked younger with her pale face and downcast eyes. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to hurt, and her gray traveling dress hung loosely on her thin frame. She kept her gaze on the wooden planks of the sidewalk as she walked, counting each step, focusing on the rhythm of her boots against the wood to keep her mind from the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The shopkeeper, Mr. Horace Wendell, was supposed to meet her at the stagecoach station. Clara stood beside her bag, waiting, still looking down. She could feel the eyes of passers-by on her, curious and assessing. She had learned long ago that it was safer not to look up, not to meet anyone's gaze. In her father's house, looking up had meant punishment. In the orphanage after his death, keeping her eyes down had meant survival. An hour passed. The sun moved across the sky, and still no one came to claim her. The stagecoach driver had already unloaded the rest of the cargo and prepared to continue his route. He approached Clara with concern creasing his weathered face. "Miss, you sure someone's coming for you?" "Yes, sir," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mr. Wendell said he would meet me here." The driver scratched his beard. "Well, I got to move on. You need me to take you to the boarding house. Ain't proper for a young lady to be standing alone out here." Before Clara could answer, a woman's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold. "You must be the mail-order bride." Clara flinched at the tone but did not look up. She saw the hem of an expensive silk dress, the kind that cost more than Clara had ever possessed in her entire life. "Yes, madam, I am Clara Zimmerman. I am here to marry Mr. Wendell." A harsh laugh erupted from the woman. "Well, that is not going to happen, girl. Horace married me last week. I am Mrs. Wendell now, and I suggest you get back on that stagecoach and return to wherever you came from." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, her hands gripping her carpetbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. "But he sent for me. We had an arrangement." "Arrangements change," the woman said dismissively. "Horace was weak-willed, and I convinced him he could do better than some desperate orphan girl. Now, if you will excuse me, I have shopping to attend to." The silk dress swept away, leaving Clara standing alone beside the stagecoach station. The driver looked at her with pity. "I am real sorry, miss. That is a rotten deal." "The boarding house," Clara managed to say through the tightness in her throat. "How much does it cost?" $2 a week, but they serve meals." "You got money." Clara had exactly $7 to her name. That would give her 3 weeks to figure out what to do, but then what? She nodded slowly, still not lifting her eyes. The driver picked up her carpetbag. "Come on then. I will take you over there before I leave town." The boarding house was run by a kind widow named Mrs. Patterson, who took one look at Clara's defeated posture and immediately softened. She showed Clara to a small but clean room on the second floor and did not press when Clara asked if she could take her meals in her room for the evening. Alone in the narrow bed that night, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried not to cry. She had nowhere to go. No family, no prospects, and now no husband. The fear that had been her constant companion since childhood wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket. Tomorrow she would have to venture out and find work, any work to survive. But tonight, She allowed herself to feel the crushing weight of her situation. The next morning, Clara forced herself out of bed before dawn. She washed her face in the basin, pinned up her hair with trembling fingers, and smoothed down the same gray dress. She had one other dress in her bag, equally plain and worn. With her eyes trained on the floorboards, she made her way downstairs to the dining room where Mrs. Patterson had set out breakfast for the boarders. "There you are, dear," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Sit yourself down. You need a good meal." Clara took a seat at the long table, keeping her gaze fixed on her empty plate. Two other boarders sat at the far end, miners by the look of their work-worn clothes, and they paid her little attention as they shoveled food into their mouths and discussed the day ahead. Mrs. Patterson set a plate of eggs, biscuits, and bacon in front of Clara. "Eat up now. You are far too thin." "Thank you, madam." Clara picked up her fork but found her appetite had abandoned her. She forced down a few bites anyway, knowing she needed the strength. "I heard what happened yesterday," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, settling into the chair beside Clara. "That Wendell fellow showed himself to be a coward and a liar. You are better off without him." Clara nodded but said nothing. Better off was relative when you had no options at all. "You will need work," Mrs. Patterson continued. "There is not much for respectable women in Beaver, but the general store needs help. Old Mr. Hawkins runs it, and his wife is getting too frail to manage the stock. You could try there. Also, the school teacher might need an assistant. And then there is always washing and mending, though that does not pay much." "I will try them all," Clara said softly. "I am grateful for the suggestions." After breakfast, Clara ventured out into the morning sunshine with her eyes on the ground. The main street of Beaver was already busy with activity. Wagons rolled past, horses whinnied, and people called greetings to one another. Clara walked along the edge of the street, making herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. The general store was her first stop. Mr. Hawkins was a portly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He listened to Clara's quiet request for work and shook his head regretfully. "I am sorry, miss, but I hired someone just 2 days ago. My nephew came down from Salt Lake City, and I could not turn away family. I wish you luck, though." The schoolhouse was next. The teacher, a stern-looking woman named Miss Pritchard, barely glanced at Clara before saying she had no need for assistance and no funds to pay for it anyway. By midday, Clara had visited every establishment in town that might employ a woman. The answer was always the same: no work available, no positions open. She walked back toward the boarding house with her heart sinking lower with each step. As she passed the saloon, she heard someone call out, "Hey there, pretty lady, looking for work?" Clara's stomach turned. She walked faster, not looking up, not responding. "We could use a girl like you," the voice persisted. "Good money in it." Clara nearly ran the last block to the boarding house. Once inside, she leaned against the closed door, breathing hard, her heart pounding. She knew what kind of work that man had been suggesting, and she would rather starve than resort to that. But as the afternoon wore on, and she sat in her small room counting and recounting her remaining money, the fear began to whisper that she might not have a choice. That evening, Mrs. Patterson knocked on her door. "Dear, come down for supper. No use sitting up here alone." Clara joined the other boarders in the dining room. There were more people this time, including a family passing through on their way to California and a traveling salesman who talked endlessly about his wares. Clara sat quietly, eating little, speaking less. "Any luck with work?" Mrs. Patterson asked. Clara shook her head. "Well, do not give up hope. Something will turn up." But 3 days passed and nothing turned up. Clara spent her time walking the streets of Beaver, asking at every door, offering to do any kind of honest work. She received only rejections and pitying looks. Some people were kind, offering her a meal or a word of encouragement. Others were dismissive, looking at her shabby dress and defeated posture with thinly veiled contempt. On the fourth day, Clara sat on a bench outside the boarding house, her eyes fixed on the ground as always, trying to figure out what to do. She had enough money for 2 more weeks, and then she would be destitute. The thought of what might happen after that terrified her so much she could barely breathe. She did not hear the heavy footsteps approaching until a pair of worn leather boots appeared in her line of vision. They were large boots, covered in dust and mountain soil. She did not look up. "You all right, miss?" The voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling down a mountainside, but there was something gentle underneath it. Clara kept her eyes down. "Yes, sir, thank you for asking. You do not look all right. You look like someone who has lost everything and does not know where to turn." The accuracy of his observation made Clara's throat tighten. She still did not look up, but she felt tears prick at her eyes. "I will manage, sir." There was a long pause. Then the man sat down on the bench beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. Clara saw that his trousers were buckskin, well made but clearly used for hard living. His hands, which he rested on his knees, were large and calloused, marked with old scars. "Name is Dalton Yates," he said. "Most folks around here call me the Mountain Man, on account of I live up in the Tushars most of the year, trapping and hunting. I come down to Beaver every few months for supplies." Clara did not respond. She had learned that silence was often the safest choice. "I have been watching you for the past few days," Dalton continued, and Clara tensed, fear spiking through her. He must have noticed because he quickly added, "Not in a bad way, miss. Just noticing that you walk around town looking like the whole world is sitting on your shoulders, and you never once lift your eyes. Got me curious about what could make a young woman so afraid." "I am not afraid," Clara whispered, which was a lie so obvious that even she did not believe it. "All right," Dalton said, his tone easy and non-confrontational. "Then maybe you are just real interested in dirt and wooden planks." Despite everything, the corner of Clara's mouth twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. "I heard about what happened with Wendell," Dalton said. "That was a cowardly thing he did. Left you stranded here with no prospects. That would make anyone feel pretty low." Clara's hands twisted in her lap. "I will find work. I just need more time. There is not much work in Beaver for women, not the respectable kind anyway. It is a hard truth, but there it is. I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. Dalton was quiet for a moment, and Clara could feel him looking at her, though she kept her gaze firmly on the ground. "What if I had a proposition for you, a respectable one?" Clara's entire body went rigid. She started to rise, but Dalton held up his hands in a placating gesture. Wait, hear me out. I am talking about honest work, nothing improper. I got a cabin up in the mountains about 2 hours' ride from here. It is a good cabin, solid and warm, but it could use a woman's touch. I am not much for keeping things clean and organized, and my cooking would probably kill a man if he ate it long enough. I was thinking about hiring someone to help with the domestic side of things. Cooking, cleaning, mending. I would pay fair wages, provide room and board, and I would treat you with complete respect. You would have your own space, and I would not bother you none." Clara's mind raced. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Men did not make offers like that without expecting something in return. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because you need help, and I need help. Seems like a practical arrangement. You do not know anything about me. I know you are desperate enough to consider anything, which means you will work hard. I know you keep your eyes down, which tells me you have been hurt and you are careful. I respect that. And Mrs. Patterson speaks well of you, says you are polite and quiet and do not cause trouble. That is good enough for me. Clara finally lifted her eyes, but only as high as his chest. He was wearing a rough spun shirt that stretched across impossibly broad shoulders. She could see the outline of powerful muscles beneath the fabric. This was a man who was built for survival in the harsh mountain environment. He could easily overpower her if he wanted to. The thought made her heart race with fear. As if reading her thoughts, Dalton said gently, "I am not going to hurt you, miss. I am offering you honest work for honest pay. If you do not feel comfortable with the arrangement, you can leave any time, no questions asked. I will even bring you back to town myself." "Why would you do this?" Clara asked. "You could hire anyone." "Could I? Most women in Beaver are already settled with families or jobs. The ones that are not are either working in the saloon or are too young. You are in need and I am in need. Sometimes that is how things work out." Clara was silent for a long time, weighing her options. She had less than 2 weeks of funds left, no job prospects, no family, no friends. Winter was coming and she would be on the street when her money ran out. This offer, as potentially dangerous as it was, might be her only chance. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "and if I feel unsafe at any point, you promise you will bring me back to town. You have my word. And if you want, we can tell Mrs. Patterson the arrangement. She can check on you whenever she wants, make sure everything is proper. I come to town regular anyway for supplies." That made Clara feel slightly better. If Mrs. Patterson knew where she was and could check on her, there was some level of accountability. She took a deep breath, still not looking higher than his chest. "All right, I will try it, but if I want to leave, I leave." "Fair enough." Dalton stood up and Clara saw just how tall he was. At least 6 feet, maybe more, with a frame that spoke of years of hard physical labor. "I need to finish getting my supplies today. Can you be ready to leave tomorrow morning, early, right after dawn?" "Yes." "Good, I will come by here with the wagon, bring whatever you have. It gets cold in the mountains, so if you need warmer clothes, let me know and I will get them for you before we leave. I will manage with what I have." Dalton tipped his head, then walked away with long, purposeful strides. Clara sat on the bench for a long time afterward, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life or the smartest decision. Only time would tell. That night, she told Mrs. Patterson about the arrangement. The older woman looked concerned at first, but then nodded thoughtfully. "Dalton Yates is a good man as far as I know. He has been coming to Beaver for years, and I have never heard a bad word about him. Keeps to himself mostly, but he is always respectful and honest in his dealings. If he says he will treat you right, I believe he will. But you be careful, dear. And you know you always have a place here if you need to come back." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means more than you know." Clara spent the rest of the evening packing her few belongings. She had so little it seemed pathetic. 2 dresses, 1 pair of spare boots that were nearly worn through, some undergarments, a brush, and a small Bible that had belonged to her mother. Everything fit in her carpetbag with room to spare. She did not sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind spun with possibilities, most of them frightening. But when dawn came and she heard the sound of a wagon outside, she forced herself to get up, get dressed, and go downstairs. Dalton was waiting beside a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong horses. In the early morning light, Clara got her first real look at him, though she still did not lift her eyes to his face. He was even bigger than she had thought, with arms thick as tree trunks and hands that looked like they could snap a branch without effort. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord. He wore buckskin trousers, a wool shirt, and a heavy coat despite the relative warmth of the morning. "Morning," he said. "You ready?" "Yes." He took her carpetbag and placed it gently in the back of the wagon, then offered his hand to help her up onto the bench seat. Clara hesitated, then took it. His hand engulfed hers, rough and warm, but his grip was careful, as though he was aware of his own strength and did not want to hurt her. Mrs. Patterson came out to see them off, pressing a wrapped package into Clara's hands. "Some food for the journey. You take care of yourself, dear." "I will. Thank you for everything." The wagon rolled out of Beaver as the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Clara kept her eyes on her hands, folded in her lap. The package from Mrs. Patterson rested beside her, and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves was almost soothing. Dalton did not try to force conversation, which Clara appreciated. They rode in silence for the first hour, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the jingle of harnesses, and the occasional call of a bird. The road, such as it was, began to climb into the foothills, and the air grew noticeably cooler and fresher. Finally, Dalton spoke. "It is beautiful country up here, some of the best in the whole territory." Clara glanced up just enough to see the landscape. He was right. The mountains rose around them in layers of green and gray, with stands of aspen and pine covering the slopes. Wildflowers still bloomed in patches beside the road, defying the approaching autumn. "You ever look at the world around you?" Dalton asked, not unkindly. "Or do you always keep your eyes down like that?" "I look when I need to," Clara said quietly. "That is a shame. A person could miss a lot of beauty that way." Clara did not respond. Beauty was for people who felt safe enough to appreciate it. She had never been one of those people. They rode higher into the mountains, and the temperature continued to drop. Clara pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying not to shiver. Dalton noticed. He reached behind the bench seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket, which he handed to her without comment. "Thank you. You are going to need warmer clothes. I should have thought of that before we left. I have some furs at the cabin. They are not fancy, but they will keep you warm." Another hour passed, and the road narrowed to little more than a trail. The wagon rocked and jolted over uneven ground, and Clara had to grip the edge of the seat to keep from being thrown around. Dalton handled the horses with practiced ease, guiding them through ruts and around rocks with the confidence of someone who had made this journey countless times. Finally, they emerged into a clearing, and Clara saw the cabin. It was larger than she had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch. The roof looked recently repaired, and there was a small barn set back from the main house. Mountains rose on all sides, creating a natural amphitheater that made the clearing feel both protected and isolated. "Here we are," Dalton said, bringing the wagon to a stop. "Home." He hopped down and came around to help Clara, who accepted his hand again and climbed down carefully. Her legs were stiff from the long ride and she stumbled slightly. Dalton's hand shot out to steady her, his grip firm but gentle on her elbow. "Easy. Take your time." Once Clara had her footing, Dalton released her and grabbed her carpetbag from the wagon. "Let me show you around." He led her up onto the porch and opened the door. The inside of the cabin was dim and cool, and it smelled of wood smoke and pine. As Clara's eyes adjusted, she saw that it was indeed one large room divided into sections. There was a cooking area with a massive stone fireplace, a table with mismatched chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a sleeping area with a large bed in one corner. "I know it is not fancy," Dalton said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it is solid and warm. I built most of it myself." Clara looked around, still not lifting her eyes to his face. "Where would I sleep? That is the thing. I only have the one bed right now, but I figured I would build you a separate room. There is plenty of space on the north side of the cabin, and I have the lumber. It will take me a few days to get it done." In the meantime, you can have the bed and I will sleep on the porch. It is not too cold yet, and I have plenty of blankets." Clara's fear eased slightly. He was offering to sleep outside and build her a separate room. Those were not the actions of a man with bad intentions. "That is very kind of you. It is the right thing to do. Now, let me show you where everything is." Dalton gave Clara a tour of the cabin, pointing out where he kept the food stores, the cooking pots, the firewood, and the various tools and supplies. Everything was in a state of organized chaos, clearly arranged by someone who knew where things were but had no concern for neatness or aesthetics. "Like I said, I am not much for keeping house," Dalton admitted. "That is where you come in. I need meals cooked, clothes mended, things kept clean and organized. In return, you get room, board, and $10 a month. Does that sound fair?" $10 a month was more than generous for this kind of work. Clara nodded. "Yes, that is very fair." "Good. Now I am going to unload the wagon and tend to the horses. Why do not you look around, get your bearings, and if you feel up to it, maybe start something for supper? I brought back some fresh supplies, including coffee, flour, beans, and salt pork. There is also venison in the cold cellar out back." Dalton left, and Clara stood in the middle of the cabin, slowly taking it all in. She had been terrified of what she might find here, but so far, everything was exactly as Dalton had described. A simple arrangement, nothing improper, just work in exchange for security. She set her carpetbag on the bed and then explored the cabin more thoroughly. The cooking area had everything she needed, though the pots and pans were well used and could benefit from a good scrubbing. The shelves were stocked with basics like flour, cornmeal, beans, and dried herbs. There was even a small supply of sugar and molasses, luxuries that showed Dalton had some means. Clara found the cold cellar, a small underground room accessed through a door in the floor. It was stocked with preserved vegetables, smoked meats, and several large chunks of venison. She selected a good piece and brought it upstairs, then set about preparing supper. Cooking was something Clara knew how to do. It was one of the few useful skills she had learned before her father died. She seasoned the venison, prepared a pot of beans, and made biscuits from scratch. As she worked, she felt some of her tension ease. This, at least, was familiar territory. Dalton came back in just as the sun was beginning to set. He had unhitched the horses and put them in the barn, and he carried an armload of firewood which he stacked neatly beside the fireplace. Then he stopped and sniffed the air. "Something smells mighty good." "Supper will be ready soon," Clara said. She was standing by the fireplace, stirring the pot of beans, her eyes as always directed downward. "I appreciate it. I have been living on hardtack and jerky for the past week. A real meal will be a welcome change." They ate at the table, and Dalton made a point of sitting across from Clara rather than beside her, giving her space. He ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting the food multiple times. "This is real good. You are a fine cook. Thank you." "How are you feeling about the arrangement? Still comfortable with it?" Clara nodded slowly. "Yes, you have been very kind and respectful. Good. I want you to feel safe here. That is important to me." After supper, Dalton cleaned up while Clara rested. He insisted she take the bed, and true to his word, he gathered blankets and headed out to the porch. "I will be right outside if you need anything. The door has a latch on the inside. You can lock it if that makes you feel better." Clara did lock the door once he was gone, not because she truly believed he was a threat, but because it gave her a small measure of control in a situation where she had very little. She lay in the large bed, which smelled of pine and wood smoke, and listened to the sounds of the mountain night. Owls hooted in the distance. The wind rustled through the trees, and from the porch she could hear the faint sound of Dalton shifting in his bedroll, For the first time in weeks, Clara felt something other than fear. It was not quite hope, not yet, but it was close. Maybe, just maybe, things would work out. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of someone chopping wood. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. Pale light filtered through the cabin's small windows, and the air was crisp and cold. She dressed quickly, shivering, and unlatched the door. Outside, Dalton was at work, swinging an axe with powerful, precise strokes. He had removed his shirt despite the cold, and Clara got her first clear view of just how muscular he was. His back and arms were corded with muscle, and his skin bore the scars of a hard life. She quickly looked away, heat rising to her cheeks. Dalton noticed her and set down the axe. "Morning. Hope I did not wake you." "No, it is fine. I should be up anyway. I am starting on your room today. Figured the sooner I get it done, the better. I will be working outside most of the day, so you will have the cabin to yourself. What would you like for breakfast?" "Whatever you feel like making. I am not picky." Clara made a simple breakfast of fried salt pork, cornmeal mush, and coffee. Dalton ate quickly, thanked her, and then headed back outside to work. Clara spent the day cleaning the cabin from top to bottom. She scrubbed the pots and pans, swept the floors, organized the shelves, and mended several of Dalton's shirts that had tears and missing buttons. It felt good to have work, to be useful. And the cabin, though simple, was comfortable and safe. As the day wore on, Clara found herself relaxing in a way she had not in years. There was no one here to hurt her, no one to criticize or punish her. Just honest work and a quiet mountain setting. Dalton came in for the midday meal, and Clara served him stew made from the leftover venison and vegetables. He ate with his usual appreciation, then went back to work. Clara could hear the sound of hammering and sawing throughout the afternoon. By evening, the frame of the new room was up. Dalton came inside, exhausted and covered in sawdust, and collapsed into one of the chairs. "It is coming along. Should have it finished in a few more days." "You work very hard," Clara said, setting a plate of food in front of him. "So do you. This place has not been this clean since I built it." Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Dalton worked on the new room and Clara managed the cabin. They ate meals together, though conversation was sparse. Clara still kept her eyes down most of the time, and Dalton did not push her to talk more than she was comfortable with. He seemed content with the silence, and Clara appreciated that he did not demand anything from her beyond the work she had agreed to do. On the fourth day, the new room was finished. It was small but well made, with a narrow bed, a chest for her belongings, and a window that looked out over the mountains. Dalton had even built a simple shelf and hung a curtain over the window for privacy. "What do you think?" he asked, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed over his broad chest. Clara stepped inside and looked around. It was more than she had expected, far more than she deserved. "It is wonderful, thank you. You are welcome. Now I can sleep inside again. That porch gets cold at night." That evening, after supper, Dalton sat by the fireplace carving a piece of wood while Clara mended a pair of his trousers. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It was peaceful, almost domestic, and Clara realized with surprise that she felt comfortable here. "Can I ask you something?" Dalton said suddenly. Clara tensed slightly but nodded. "Yes." "Why do you never look up? What are you afraid of?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara's hands stilled on the fabric in her lap. She had known this question would come eventually, but she still was not sure how to answer it. "I learned to keep my eyes down," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was safer that way." "Safer from what?" Clara hesitated, then decided that Dalton had been honest and kind with her, and he deserved some honesty in return. My father was a hard man. He had rules, and if you broke them, he punished you. Looking him in the eye was considered disrespectful, so I learned to keep my eyes down. After he died, I went to an orphanage, and it was the same there. The matron said children should be seen and not heard, and we should always keep our eyes lowered in the presence of adults. I suppose the habit just stayed with me. Dalton was quiet for a moment, then said gently, "I am sorry you went through that. No one should be treated that way. But you are not a child anymore, and I am not your father or some cruel matron. You can look up here. You can look at whatever you want. You are safe." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "It is not that easy. I have been doing this for so long I do not know how to stop. Then maybe we work on it together, little by little. No pressure, no punishment, just practice. Why does it matter to you?" "Because," Dalton said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a large, rough man, "there is a whole beautiful world out there, and you are missing it. You are missing the mountains and the sky and the stars. You are missing seeing the faces of people who care about you. That is no way to live." "No one has ever cared about me," Clara whispered. "That is not true. Mrs. Patterson cares about you, and I reckon I am starting to care about you too." Clara's head jerked up in surprise, and for the first time since she had met him, her eyes went all the way to his face. Dalton Yates had a strong, weathered face with deep-set eyes the color of dark honey. His nose had been broken at some point and healed slightly crooked. He had a thick beard that was neatly trimmed, and his expression was open and honest. Their eyes met, and Clara felt a jolt of something she could not name. It was not fear, though fear was there too. It was something else, something warm and unsettling at the same time. "There," Dalton said with a small smile. "That was not so hard, was it?" Clara immediately dropped her eyes back to her lap, her heart racing. "I should not have." "Why not?" "Because it is not proper. Because I do not know you well enough. Because—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the tangle of emotions inside her. "Because you are scared," Dalton finished for her. "And that is all right, I get that. But I meant what I said. You are safe here, with me. I am not going to hurt you or punish you or do anything that makes you uncomfortable. You have my word on that." They sat in silence for a while longer, the fire burning low. Finally, Clara excused herself to her new room and closed the door behind her. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her hands shaking. She had looked at him. She had looked directly at Dalton's face, and the world had not ended. She had not been punished. He had smiled at her, a genuine, kind smile. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Over the following weeks, autumn settled more firmly over the mountains. The aspen trees turned brilliant shades of gold and orange, and the air grew colder, especially at night. Dalton spent his days hunting and trapping, bringing back deer, elk, and rabbit. Clara spent her days cooking, cleaning, and preserving food for the winter. They were preparing for the long months ahead when the snow would come, and they would be isolated from the outside world. Clara slowly became more comfortable in the cabin and in Dalton's presence. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was always thoughtful and kind. He never raised his voice, never showed anger, and never made her feel afraid. Gradually, she began to look up more often, though she still struggled with meeting his eyes directly. One afternoon, Dalton came back from checking his traps with a large bundle of furs. "These are for you," he said, setting them on the table. "It is going to get real cold soon, and you need something warmer than those thin dresses." Clara ran her hand over the soft pelts. They were beautiful, thick, and luxurious. "I do not know how to make clothes from furs. I can help you. I have been doing it for years. Between the two of us, we can make you a warm coat, gloves, and a good pair of boots." They worked together that evening, cutting and stitching the furs. Dalton's large hands were surprisingly deft with the needle and thread, and he patiently showed Clara the best techniques for working with the thick material. As they worked side by side, their shoulders occasionally brushed, and each time it happened, Clara felt that same jolt of awareness. "You are good at this," Clara said, watching him stitch a seam with practiced ease. "Had to learn. Cannot survive up here without knowing how to make your own clothes. Store-bought stuff does not hold up in the mountains. How long have you been living here?" "About 8 years. I came west after the war, looking for a place where I could be alone and not have to think about what I had seen and done. Found this spot and decided it was as good as any." "You were in the war?" Clara asked, then immediately regretted it. It was a personal question, and she did not want to pry. But Dalton did not seem to mind. "Yeah, fought for the Union. Saw a lot of things I wish I had not. Lost a lot of friends. When it was over, I just wanted to get away from people, from towns, from anything that reminded me of all that death. The mountains gave me that. Do you ever get lonely?" Dalton looked at her, his honey-colored eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes, but loneliness is better than being surrounded by people who do not understand you or who want something from you. At least it was, until recently." "What changed recently?" "You did," Dalton said simply. "Having you here has been nice. Real nice. It is good to have someone to talk to, someone to share meals with. Makes the place feel less empty." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I feel the same way. I was so scared when I first came here, but now, I do not know. It feels like home." "Good. Because I hope you will stay, at least for the winter. It is too dangerous to go back down the mountain once the heavy snows come. But come spring, if you want to leave, I will take you. No hard feelings." "I do not think I will want to leave," Clara said quietly. The coat was finished a few days later, and Clara put it on with a sense of awe. It was the warmest, most beautiful thing she had ever owned. The fur was soft against her skin, and it fit her perfectly. Dalton had even made a hood that could be pulled up over her head. "It is perfect," Clara said, turning in a slow circle so the coat swirled around her. "I have never had anything this nice." "You deserve nice things," Dalton said. "You work hard and you have been good company. I am glad you like it." Clara looked up at him, and for a moment their eyes met and held. Something passed between them, something unspoken but profound. Clara felt her heart begin to race, and she quickly looked away, but the feeling lingered. That night, as Clara lay in her small room, she thought about Dalton. She thought about his kindness, his patience, the way he made her feel safe. She thought about his strong hands and gentle voice, his broad shoulders and honest eyes. And she realized, with a mixture of fear and wonder, that she was developing feelings for him. Real feelings, the kind she had never experienced before. The first snow came in late October, dusting the mountains with white. Dalton had been right about the isolation. The trail down to Beaver became impassable, and they were truly alone. But Clara did not mind. She had everything she needed here: food, warmth, safety, and Dalton. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, they spent more time together in the evenings. Dalton taught Clara how to play cards, and she taught him a few songs her mother had sung to her when she was small. They talked about their lives, their pasts, their dreams. Clara learned that Dalton had been an only child, raised by his father after his mother died in childbirth. His father had been a trapper as well, and he had taught Dalton everything he knew before dying of pneumonia 5 years ago. Dalton learned that Clara's mother had died when she was 10, leaving her alone with her abusive father. After his death from drink when she was 17, she had spent nearly 3 years in the orphanage, working as a servant in exchange for room and board. When the opportunity came to be a mail-order bride, she had taken it, desperate for any escape. I am glad Wendell was a coward, Dalton said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Because if he had married you, you would not be here now. I suppose that is true." "Though I did not feel glad at the time." "No, I imagine you did not, but things have a way of working out. You were meant to be here, I believe that." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, meeting his eyes fully. "I believe that too." December arrived with heavy snows that piled up around the cabin. Dalton had to shovel paths to the barn and the cold cellar daily, and he spent hours chopping wood to keep the fire going. Clara cooked hearty meals and kept the cabin warm and cozy. They were completely cut off from the rest of the world, but neither of them minded. One evening, Dalton came inside covered in snow, stamping his feet and shaking off his coat. "It is really coming down out there. We are going to be buried if this keeps up." Clara had made a venison stew with root vegetables, and the smell filled the cabin. "Come warm up by the fire. Supper is almost ready." Dalton settled into his chair by the fireplace, and Clara brought him a cup of hot coffee. Their fingers brushed as she handed it to him, and the touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you," Dalton said, his voice low. They ate supper in comfortable silence, and afterward Dalton pulled out his carving tools. He had been working on something for weeks but had not shown Clara what it was. Tonight, he seemed ready. "I made something for you," he said, handing her a small wooden object. Clara took it and saw that it was a beautifully carved bird, a lark with every feather detailed and lifelike. "Dalton, this is incredible. How did you do this?" "Practice." "A lot of practice. I wanted to give you something to thank you for everything you have done, for making this place feel like a home." Clara held the carving carefully, tracing the delicate lines with her finger. "I do not know what to say. No one has ever given me a gift before." "Then it is about time someone did." Clara looked up at him, and this time she did not look away. Their eyes met, and she saw warmth and affection there, mixed with something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "Dalton," she whispered, "I have to tell you something." "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment Clara was terrified she had said the wrong thing, that she had ruined everything. But then Dalton smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "I have been in love with you for weeks," he said. "I just did not want to say anything and scare you off." "You are not scared of how you feel?" Clara asked. "Terrified," Dalton admitted, "but in a good way. You make me feel things I thought I had lost the ability to feel. You make me want things I thought I did not deserve. You make me hope for a future that is more than just surviving alone on this mountain." Clara set the carved bird carefully on the table and stood up. She took a step toward Dalton, then another, until she was standing right in front of him. He looked up at her, his eyes full of tenderness and longing. "I am scared too," Clara whispered, "but I do not want to be scared anymore. I do not want to spend my life looking down, missing everything beautiful. You have shown me that I can be safe, that I can be cared for. You have shown me what it means to be treated with kindness and respect, and I love you for it." Dalton stood slowly, his large frame towering over her smaller one. He reached out and gently cupped her face with his calloused hand. "Can I kiss you?" Clara nodded, her heart pounding. Dalton leaned down and his lips met hers in a kiss that was tender and sweet and full of promise. Clara's eyes closed, and she felt herself melt into him, into the safety and warmth he offered. His other arm came around her waist, pulling her close, and she rested her hands on his broad chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I want you to stay, not just for the winter, forever. I want you to be my wife if you will have me." "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They held each other by the firelight, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt complete. She felt loved and wanted and safe. She had come to this mountain as a desperate, broken woman, and she was becoming whole again in the arms of a man who saw her worth. The rest of the winter passed in a haze of happiness. They spent their days working together and their evenings talking and laughing by the fire. Dalton taught Clara how to shoot a rifle and how to read tracks in the snow. Clara taught Dalton her favorite recipes and how to dance, even though they had no music except the songs she sang. When Clara told Dalton she wanted to see the stars, really see them without fear or shame, he bundled her up in her fur coat and led her outside one clear, cold night. The sky was an explosion of stars, more than Clara had ever imagined existed. They stretched from horizon to horizon, a blanket of light against the darkness. "Look up," Dalton said softly, standing behind her with his arms wrapped around her waist. "Look at how beautiful it is." Clara tilted her head back, resting against Dalton's solid chest, and looked up at the stars. They were breathtaking, magnificent, overwhelming in their beauty. And for the first time in her life, Clara looked up without fear, without shame, without the need to protect herself. She looked up and saw the glory of the universe spread out above her, and she felt small and significant all at once. "It is incredible," she whispered. "So are you," Dalton said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "So are you." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, tears of joy and release. She had spent so much of her life afraid, so much time looking down, protecting herself from a world that had been cruel and harsh. But Dalton had shown her a different world, a world where she was valued and cherished. He had lifted her chin and shown her the stars, and in doing so, he had set her free. When spring finally arrived and the snow began to melt, Dalton and Clara made the journey down to Beaver. They went to the small church and were married by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Mrs. Patterson attended, crying happy tears and hugging Clara so tightly she could barely breathe. "I knew he was a good man," Mrs. Patterson said. "I am so happy for you, dear." "Thank you for everything," Clara said. "You helped me when I had no one. I will never forget that." They stayed in town for a few days, getting supplies and visiting with the few people Clara had met during her brief time there. Word had spread about what Horace Wendell had done, and he and his new wife had left Beaver in disgrace several months earlier, unable to face the judgment of their neighbors. When they returned to the mountain, it was with a wagon full of supplies and a sense of contentment that Clara had never known was possible. The cabin was exactly as they had left it, and as Clara stepped inside, she realized that this was truly her home now. Not just a place where she worked or a place where she was safe, but a home where she was loved. That summer, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Dalton was overjoyed, though he immediately became even more protective than he had been before. He worried constantly about her health, making sure she did not work too hard and that she ate enough. Clara found his concern endearing, even when it was a bit excessive. "I am fine," she assured him one afternoon as he insisted she sit down and rest. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am strong enough to handle this." "I know you are strong," Dalton said, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hand. "But you are also precious to me. You and this baby are the most important things in my life. I just want to make sure you are both safe and healthy." Clara reached out and ran her fingers through his long hair, which he had recently trimmed at her request. "We are safe and healthy because of you. You take such good care of us." Their son was born in February, during a fierce snowstorm that raged outside the cabin. Dalton delivered the baby himself, his large hands surprisingly gentle and sure. When he placed the squalling infant in Clara's arms, tears streamed down his weathered face. "A boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son." They named him Daniel after Dalton's father. He was a healthy baby with a strong cry and his father's dark hair. Clara had never known love like this existed, the fierce, protective love of a mother for her child. And watching Dalton with their son, seeing the tenderness with which he held the tiny baby, made her love him even more. Life settled into a new rhythm. Clara cared for Daniel while also managing the household, and Dalton continued to hunt and trap, though he stayed closer to the cabin now, never wanting to be far from his family. The cabin rang with the sounds of a baby's laughter and cries, and the walls that had once echoed with loneliness now echoed with love. 2 years later, they had a daughter, whom they named Mary after Clara's mother. She had Clara's blonde hair and Dalton's honey-colored eyes, and she was as sweet-tempered as her brother was rambunctious. Dalton adored his daughter, and Clara often found him holding her and singing to her in his rough, off-key voice. As the years passed, their family grew. They had 2 more children, another son and another daughter, and the cabin expanded to accommodate them all. Dalton built additional rooms and a larger kitchen, and Clara filled the space with warmth and love. They made trips down to Beaver several times a year, and the children grew up knowing both the isolation of the mountains and the community of the town. Clara never forgot the frightened, broken woman she had been when she first arrived in Beaver, the woman who could not lift her eyes from the ground. But that woman seemed like a distant memory now, someone from another lifetime. Clara was strong now, confident and capable. She looked people in the eye when she spoke to them. She laughed freely and often. She sang while she worked and danced with her children. She had learned to live without fear, to embrace the beauty of the world around her. And every clear night, when the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Dalton and Clara would step outside and look up at the stars together. Dalton would wrap his arms around her, and they would stand in comfortable silence, marveling at the vastness of the sky and the life they had built together. "You ever regret it?" Clara asked one night. "Bringing me here, taking on all this responsibility?" "Not for a single second," Dalton said. "You and the kids are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a purpose, a reason to be more than just a man surviving alone on a mountain. You gave me a family, a life. I should be asking you if you regret it." Clara turned in his arms and looked up at him, meeting his eyes with no hesitation, no fear. "Never. You saved me, Dalton. You showed me that I was worth saving. You showed me the stars." He kissed her then, long and deep, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. The stars shone above them, constant and eternal, a reminder of all the beauty in the world that Clara had once been too afraid to see. They grew old together on that mountain, watching their children grow and eventually leave to start families of their own. Daniel became a rancher in the valley below. Mary married a doctor and moved to Salt Lake City. The younger two stayed closer, building their own cabins within a day's ride of their parents. Even in their old age, Dalton and Clara remained devoted to each other. Dalton's hair turned gray, and his body bore the accumulated aches and pains of a life lived hard. Clara's face lined with wrinkles, and her hands grew gnarled from years of work. But when they looked at each other, they saw the young man who had offered kindness to a stranger and the young woman who had learned to look up and see the stars. On a warm summer evening, when Clara was 68 and Dalton was 72, they sat on the porch of the cabin watching the sun set over the mountains. Their grandchildren were visiting, filling the house with noise and laughter, but for the moment it was just the two of them enjoying the quiet. "I have had a good life," Dalton said, taking Clara's hand in his. A really good life, and it is all because of you." "We have had a good life," Clara corrected. "We built it together. That we did." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Then Clara said softly, "Thank you. For what? For lifting my chin. For showing me the stars. For teaching me that I did not have to be afraid anymore. For loving me when I did not know how to love myself." Dalton squeezed her hand. "It was my honor and my privilege." As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara looked up. She looked up without fear, without hesitation, and she saw the same stars that had hung over this mountain for thousands of years. The stars that would continue to hang there long after she and Dalton were gone. The stars that had witnessed their love story and would witness countless others. She had been the bride who never looked up, too broken and afraid to see the world around her. But Dalton had lifted her chin, gently and patiently, and he had shown her the stars. And in doing so, he had shown her how to live, how to love, and how to be truly free. Years later, when Clara was 80 and Dalton was 84, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, his hand still clasped in hers. Clara grieved deeply, missing the man who had been her partner, her protector, and her greatest love. But she did not fall apart. Dalton had made her too strong for that. She lived for another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling them stories of the mountain man who had saved a desperate mail-order bride and built a life with her that was filled with love and laughter. She told them about the stars and how their grandfather had taught her to look up and see the beauty in the world. When Clara finally passed away at the age of 85, she was buried beside Dalton on a hill, overlooking the cabin where they had spent so many happy years. Their graves were marked with simple wooden crosses, and their children planted wildflowers all around, the kind that bloomed every spring in brilliant colors. The cabin still stood, maintained by the family who visited regularly and told stories about the couple who had lived there. And on clear nights, when the stars shone bright over the Tushar Mountains, it was said that you could still feel their presence there. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last forever. The story of Clara and Dalton became a family legend, passed down through generations. The mail-order bride who had never looked up, and the mountain man who had lifted her chin until she saw the stars. It was a story about love and courage, about overcoming fear and finding hope in the most unexpected places. It was a story about two broken people who had healed each other and built something beautiful together. And every time the story was told, someone would look up at the stars and remember that sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you, one person to show you that you are worth more than you ever imagined, one person to lift your chin and show you the stars. The end of their story was not really an end at all, but a continuation. Their love lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the cabin that still stood on the mountain, in the stories that were told around family dinners and campfires. Dalton and Clara's legacy was not one of wealth or fame, but of love and family, of courage and transformation. They had taken the hand that life dealt them and turned it into something extraordinary. The cabin eventually became a gathering place for the family, a reminder of where they came from and the love that had started it all. Every summer, the family would come together there, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, filling the expanded structure with the same kind of warmth and laughter that Clara and Dalton had created all those years ago. And on those clear mountain nights, when the sky was filled with countless stars, they would all go outside and look up, remembering the woman who had learned to see the beauty around her and the man who had patiently taught her how. They would stand together under that vast canopy of light and feel connected to something bigger than themselves, connected to a love story that had started over a century ago and would continue for generations to come. Clara had arrived in Beaver, Utah Territory in 1876 as a frightened, defeated woman with her eyes always on the ground. She had left this world in 1961 as a woman who had lived fully, loved deeply, and seen more stars than she could count. She had been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. She had been strong and brave and beloved. And through it all, she had remembered the moment when Dalton Yates, the mountain man with gentle hands and a kind heart, had lifted her chin and shown her the stars, changing the trajectory of her life forever. That moment had been the beginning of everything, the first step on a journey that would lead to more happiness than she had ever dreamed possible. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was a quiet love, built on respect and kindness, on patience and understanding. It was the kind of love that grew slowly, deepening over time until it became as constant and enduring as the mountains themselves. It was a love that had weathered storms and hardships, that had celebrated triumphs and mourned losses, that had remained steadfast through every season of life. And in the end, it was a love that had transformed them both. Dalton had been a lonely man seeking purpose, and Clara had given him family and belonging. Clara had been a frightened woman seeking safety, and Dalton had given her courage and freedom. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone. The stars still shine over the Tushar Mountains, constant and unchanging. The cabin still stands, weathered but strong. And the story of Clara and Dalton continues to be told, a reminder that love can heal, that kindness matters, and that sometimes all you need is someone to lift your chin and show you the stars. It was a good life, a full life, a life worth living. And it all started with a mountain man who saw a broken woman and offered her kindness, and a woman who found the courage to accept it. They found each other when they both needed it most, and they built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. The end came peacefully for both of them, just as their life together had been peaceful. There were no regrets, no unfinished business, no words left unsaid. They had lived fully and loved completely, and when it was time to go, they were ready, knowing that they had made the most of every moment they were given. Their children would sometimes stand at their graves and look up at the stars, remembering the stories their parents had told them. About hardship and hope, about fear and courage, about a mail-order bride who never looked up and a mountain man who taught her to see the stars. And in those moments, they would feel their parents' love surrounding them, as constant and eternal as those stars, a legacy that would never fade. The family prospered, spreading out across Utah and beyond, but they always remembered where they came from. They remembered the cabin in the mountains and the love story that had started everything. They told the story to their children, who told it to theirs, keeping the memory alive, keeping the love alive. And so the story ends where it began, under a canopy of stars in the mountains of Utah. A story of transformation and redemption, of finding love in unexpected places, of learning to look up and see the beauty that surrounds us. A story of Clara and Dalton, two souls who found each other in the wilderness and built a love that would echo through eternity.